Hi, I'm Anya, also known as Meppity, and today I'll be redesigning some of the characters from the Hazbin Hotel Pilot. So, I'm really late to the game, and by this point it seems everyone and their mother have reviewed the half-hour animation. For those of you who don't know, Hazbin Hotel is a planned adult animated series by Vivian or Vivsipop Medrano. The story takes place in hell, where the protagonist Charlie aims to rehabilitate sinners and send them up to heaven. If you want to watch the thing, I've left the link in the description. In all honesty, I never had much interest in the show or its creator, but YouTube recommendations have been shoving it down my throat, so when the pilot was released, I gave it a watch. Now, I'm not here to give an in-depth review, I'll link a couple of my favourite existing videos instead, but to quickly summarise my thoughts, the story has potential, but I believe the writing is in dire need of help because it currently feels like it was written by some 11-year-old who just learnt all the swear words. The sound effects are overused, the backgrounds feel sparse despite the supposed overcrowded nature of hell, and the shot composition and layouts are all over the place. One thing I absolutely must commend though is the animation. I thought the team did a fantastic job, movement was mostly fluid, and a lot of energy was conveyed. I could pick on plenty more, but we must remember that this was a pilot and we can't expect everything to be perfect and fully realised. Anyway, there was one thing that particularly bothered me about the pilot, and that is the character designs. I never really liked Vivsipop's art and animation style, although she certainly does get creative, I'll give her that. This is just my personal taste, I suppose, but I also found some of the designs to be objectively flawed. Okay, so I'm going to go over what I didn't like about the designs now, but you can skip this and click on the timestamp that I've put on the screen if you want to get straight to the speed paint. I'll start with the baseline issues. The body shapes all look the same. Everyone is super skinny, with long limbs, waspy waists, and big heads. There are so many triangular and tapering shapes, I hardly see any squares or circles, and because of that, things look monotonous. Details. So many unnecessary details. Damn Vivsy, even your fonts go above and beyond with the bells and whistles. Unfortunately, all the decorations remind me of what many 12-year-olds OCs look like. You know, when there's a bunch of quirky, oh so unique features scattered all over the characters, competing for attention. No offense to any 12-year-olds watching. Anyway, what are these details trying to achieve? So much about character design is carefully selecting elements that enhance and support the character. After all, character design is 50% character, 50% design. When you start adding card suits on wings, polka dots on hair, and random floating X's, then you're taking away from the essence of these characters. You don't need all this faff to create instantly recognizable designs. Here's a sort of mock-up of everyone's silhouettes if they were in similar poses. Look at this and compare it to this. Because of the similar body shapes, no one stands out in this one, but the iconic designs of all these characters are easy to spot, and guess what? You don't need a single extra detail for them to become immediately known. Another aspect of the details is that there's a lack of variety within the smaller shapes. For example, why does everyone have the same bow tie and tux combo? Does Hell have a uniform? I don't understand. All these characters supposedly died in different eras, but the costumes don't feel too well researched or varied enough to indicate that, even if these indications were to be subtle. Things like mouths are also ridiculously similar, one of the only exceptions being Charlie. If you take a look at these, do you know whose mouth is who? Not everyone has to be unique, but when the default is as distinctive as the extremely wide gape and pointed teeth, then I think at that point you ought to create a little more variety. Colour schemes. Yes, it's important to have a cohesive looking cast that fits seamlessly into its environments, but that doesn't mean using the same few colours for everyone. Can you tell whose colour palette this is? Or how about this one? Now how about these? Even when boiled down to their absolute essence, you know what series this is, this is, and this is, and who is who. You don't have to limit your colors to make a suitable cast. Like, check out this official Hazbin Hotel poster. Because of the colors and the incredibly pinched body shapes, it's difficult to tell where one character starts and another one ends. It's also hard to discern them from the background. Okay, now I'm moving on to the problems of the designs in relation to animation. Though most of the animation is smooth, many parts felt quick and jumped around. There was frequently lots going on at once with little to distinguish between the focal point and everything else. Excessive movement and poor composition won't draw the viewer's eye, and this loses our focus. I say all this, but none of these issues are actually the fault of the animators. Some stuff roots back to the storyboards, but a lot is to do with the narrow and pinched nature of the character designs. They lack in solidity, and when wiry limbs fly across the screen, they're hard to track and everything becomes tangled and confusing. Going back to silhouettes, it's difficult to tell what's going on because at this point, these are just a bunch of lines rather than like a solid structure. And we return to the details. These babies are difficult to animate. That being said, just because something is difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But as I already mentioned, those details are unnecessary anyway. The animation fell short in the pilot where they were trying to smoothly animate all that extra stuff. Look at this clip of Vaggie and her X on her eye. It jumps all over the place and kind of ruins the immersiveness. On top of that, it becomes time-consuming and therefore expensive, something that is not feasible with the majority of animation studios. On to my final point. There's a lot of visual screaming. Vivziepop is unique in that I believe she sometimes pushes her poses and expressions too far, whereas most people don't push them enough. There's so many exaggerated poses and shapes that the balance is thrown off and my eyes can barely comprehend what's going on. In design class, we've been learning about something called power and grace, which essentially boils down to the idea of knowing when to whisper and when to scream in a visual, auditory, and narrative sense. You have to vary how extreme things are because if everything is always cranking it up to 11, then it becomes boring and exhausting. Additionally, this would take away from the craziest moments that you really want to stand out, because at that point, you can't exaggerate things any further. Wow, okay, that was a lot, but I hope you found it useful. I'm about to go on to my redesigns, but first I want to clarify that none of this is me just hating on the show. I have no ill will against anyone involved in the pilot and so on. I can see the immensely hard work that went into it over the last few years, and I don't want to take away from that. And I also want to add that the changes I'm about to offer are merely suggestions. I'm by no means a professional, I have my own flaws and so do my designs. Like with these ones, I could definitely have done more research and whatnot, but I guess they're more indications of what I do, if you get me. Anyway, on to my first drawing, which is Charlie. So with Charlie's design, I chose to use her as a sort of control. So I think she's the one that I ended up changing the least. And in all honesty, I quite liked her design, especially her face. Like there's quite a few things going on, but they're simple enough that it really works. With this drawing, I spent quite a while trying to figure out the pose because I wanted to make sure as much of her was visible as possible without it being a completely open stance. Anyway, one of the things you can see I've changed is her hair. So this is, I suppose, more of a personal preference than anything, but the fact that it was straight up and down on one side, then the 3 curves on the other side, it felt wonky to me and it didn't feel like it was the same hairstyle. Also, the ponytail thing at the very end just adds a bit of clutter to the piece, but I kind of liked it and I preferred it to that straight bumpy thing, so I ended up focusing on that and making the bumps come down into there. I struggled a lot with the bow tie region. I really didn't know how I wanted the lapel area to work, but in the end I settled with just one button. The hands, again, they stayed pretty similar, and the feet also were the same. Like, I really hardly changed anything on this one. With the bottom of the trousers, you can see I extended the part that's going to be red. I made that larger than what it is in the original design, and I kept all the same colors for Charlie. I do like the colors that I used on her, and they are the default, and seeing as she is like the princess of hell, it makes sense for her to have the red. I did a little bit of liquefying and changing things around just to balance the piece out, but there you go, that's Charlie. Now I'm moving on to Vaggie. Is it Vaggie? Vaggie? I honestly don't know. Anyway, with her, I made some bigger changes. I felt like she was a good place to alter the body shape a lot more and to have someone thicker finally appear in the cast. So I did play around with her a lot. In the end, she looked quite short in this first sketch, so I extended her legs out and I tried to preserve everything else as much as I could. Like, my goal with these redesigns was not to completely overhaul the originals, but just to adapt them to still make them look like they originally were, but altered. Her hands I kept the same. Like, I didn't really feel like exploring how to do those fingers. But one thing I did move is the X's that were on her chest, I moved them to her knees just because I got rid of the stripy pattern, and so to replace that I put the X's there, and that just stops all the details from being concentrated in the top half of the picture. So here I'm playing with the eyelashes. I was just taking a look, seeing if like curves or cuts would work, but I think in the end I settled with something simpler. I also tried out giving her boots, but that didn't look so good either. In terms of how I coloured her, I tried to make her a little bit more purpley than she originally was, just to create some more variety in the colours that are happening. I did put the X back on her face at first. Frankly, it is one of the most distinctive things about her, but at the same time, it says nothing about the character. Later I did remove it again, and I did sort of similar things with this collar piece. I changed this quite a lot because I really didn't know what to do with it, but I wanted to have another place where these frill things are happening like they are on the bottom of the dress. That's how that one went. And now Alistair. Okay, this guy is the one I changed the most. I more or less had a complete overhaul, although I did keep his face pretty similar. I really broadened his shoulders, like I pushed that as far as I was willing to go. And as for his costume, I looked up what a standard 1930s man would wear. I copied the style of the sleeves and the lapel area. I also used the colours that were often found in 1930s home decor, which was a lot of greens, reds, kind of clashing muted colours, but I weirdly like the colour scheme. I'm not too happy with how he turned out because he still kind of looks wonky, but whatever. The hair was a tough one for me, like the hair and the ears, because there's just so much going on in this part of his design, but it's so distinctive to him that I really didn't want to remove it. Instead, I just made the shapes bigger and slightly more simplified so that they wouldn't be competing for too much attention. The tie area, I got rid of his bow tie and tux thing because, like I said earlier, that's what everyone seems to have in this show, so I gave him a normal tie instead. And then to match his hair, I added these weird like fluffy wing type things to his sleeves, and I kept the radio design the same, kept the hands more or less the same. Yeah, there weren't too many more changes beyond that. So as you can see, Alistair is no longer red, but that's because I swear every single character in this show is red, so I still preserved some of the warm tones with that orange. I did a lot of experimentation to see if a saturated colour would work better or not, and if it should work on the shoes, but the main thing that I went with was that green, and I did give him a pinstripe. In hindsight, I would reduce the pinstripe to be much less, so there's Alistair. finally for this video, because it's getting long already, we have seemingly everyone's favourite, Angel Dust. So Angel Dust, I didn't change him too much. I think the main thing was more costume than anything, and that's because he already does have a very unique head shape, which I personally really like. When I'm complaining about silhouettes, I do not refer to his head because you can tell straight away who it is. The main thing with him was also that I got rid of all the unnecessary spots and patterns on his head. And again, he's one of the guys who has that tux combo, so instead I popped his collar and gave him a sort of handkerchief, kind of like the thing that Fred from Scooby-Doo wears. I think that suits his personality a little better. And I also gave him little fingers, one to contrast with his giant boots, but also to contrast with everyone else who seems to have very long digits. So you can see the change I made with his suit is that rather than giving him booty shorts and a jacket, I made it a one piece. Now, I really like how that looks, but at the same time, it doesn't match the 1940s era he came from, so I think that's something that would need to be reviewed, but I do think it suits his personality better. I thickened up his limbs just the tiniest bit, it's hardly noticeable, but hopefully if he was to be animated in this design, it would be a little easier to follow. Moving on to the colours, I gave him a slightly pinker skin, fur, whatever his main body is made up of. I made that pinker, and I did keep the stripes and things, but I made them a little bit bigger, and again, I didn't let them follow the body so accurately. I kind of just had them as general stripes that you can kind of paste a texture over the top of a drawing. So there you have it. Those are all 4 of my current redesigns. If this video ends up doing well, I'm considering adding some more redesigns, but we'll see. Anyway, for now, let me know what you think. I personally believe that my redesigns are still recognizable even though I've taken so many of the details away, but they're not perfect. Let me know if you would make similar changes. Do you think I was too harsh on the original designs? If you want to know what I believe has good character design, check out the Professor Layton Mystery Game series. I think they're super funky. I used to hate them because almost everyone looks kind of ugly, but the older I've gotten, the more I've fallen in love with the wacky proportions and the bizarre personalities of the characters in that game. That's all for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. I make all kinds of art-related videos and often talk about the school I go to, Cal Arts. And if you want to become a patron for just $4, you can get unlimited critiques from me where I look at your stuff one-on-one. You get to check out my entire Cal Arts application, and you get a shout out at the end of my video. So, big thank you to Suze, Nuria, Noah, Marcy, and Gagli for being super supportive. You guys mean a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!